Imagine the perineum to be a vast space in the neural activity as small yellow marbles, or sims, bouncing around continuously like the ion pulses flowing from cell to cell. They have a lot of freedom, but they are constrained by larger objects, and so they prefer certain pathways, like the neural activity. But what are these obstacles? Imagine the marbles to be magnetic. Sometimes they stick together. We could call these groups symbols, like the groups of brain cells that form more or less stable structures and that fire together most of the time. It looks like the symbols are stationary and determine the direction of the marbles. But if you could speed up the film, you would see the symbols move themselves, pushed by many sims going in approximately the same direction. They even seem to interact with each other. Suppose the marbles are shut in according to conditions from outside. For instance, if there is a green light, the amount of marbles from there increases. We might draw causal connections between the light and the movements inside the perineum. It seems the symbols do not like green light. When the light is off again, something of the situation before remains visible in the arrangement of the symbols. The symbols remember the light. Of course, in reality, the green light doesn't interact directly with brain cells, but through the eyes. The pulse of ions that goes through the optic nerve and enters the brain initiates a complex process of symbol forming. In the end, a pulse returns to the muscles of the mouth and tongue. Together they say, "I see a green light." This we call consciousness, the ability to perceive, to then mirror this perception in the structures of the brain, and to be able to express this to the world. Who shoves whom around inside the perineum? Are the symbols shoving around the activities in the cells, or are the cells manipulating the symbols? Is it the interaction of the symbols that really matters? Or is maybe consciousness above all of this directing everything? It really all seems to depend on the level from which you look at it.
First of all, I think that a prerequisite for consciousness is the feeling that a system is mirroring the external world somehow, that it seems to understand what is out there. Well, that kind of thing is, in other words, perception is the thing that a lot of the models that have been developed have shown to be, they have shown that collective activity of this sort is actually the best kind of model. That is, a lot of microscopic activity adding up. It seems clear in the brain that that's what's happening, that certain large symbolic structures are activated from below. That means from the microscopic level. That means that, in other words, we can say very clearly that
And what happened to him?
He published another book. Well, one of them did. It's about free will.
And does it exist?
If it didn't, would I be here? That's what it's all about, right? That abstraction can come forth out of matter. Then it is rather optimistic about free will.
And Hofstadter?
He says the difference between the highest level and the lowest level.
the main thing the main difference between the lowest level and the highest level is that at the highest level, what really matters is the way things are organized, the patterns that things form. And at the low level, there isn't enough material to make a pattern. I mean, you have one neuron either on or off. That's not a pattern. But at a high level, when there are large numbers of things involved, they can form large mosaics of activity. And what really matters is the way in which those large mosaics of activity are interacting, and not particularly that there's matter down there.
So it's interaction that matters.
Interaction or pattern. It happens to be embedded or implanted in a particular kind of hardware, but the pattern itself could be implanted in any hardware.
Like what?
It could, well, I've been trying to give examples involving marbles or something like that, but neurons have been another example. In one of the dialogues in my book here, I used another example. My microscopic elements were ants, and the intermediate size elements were teams of ants. And then there were larger sizes of teams. There were teams composed of teams, or large organizations, which took on more complex kinds of tasks than a single team could do. And then eventually I had hypothetical units that I called symbols. Now these were very, very vast teams of ants. I would feel that if you had this kind of perception going on in a computer, yes, that it would be perfectly fine.
And that is a possibility, since consciousness is an interaction of patterns. The patterns have some base in some kind of hardware, but there is those kind of patterns could exist in another kind of hardware. That's the basic idea.
That's the basic idea.
So the hardware could be the computer?
Hardware could be anything, and as long as there's enough levels of building up a pattern, from the smallest to the largest, as long as there's enough levels, then you can form any kind of pattern. And in particular, this kind of pattern is something that we're aiming at.
Mm-hmm. Consciousness, but what about soul?
Well, human beings have a lot of different names that whenever you've tried to explain one thing, they will say, but what about this other thing? And they keep on jumping from one thing to another thing to another thing. If it's not soul, then it's, there's a term in philosophy called intentionality. And if it's not that, then it's self. And if it's not self, then it's the I, the capital I. And if it's not that, then it's something else. And they keep on saying, but maybe you could capture this mechanically, but not that. I think we're just going to have to open our minds up to the reality of complex structures, complex mechanisms, having more and more what we call consciousness. And when they do, they will start talking about themselves using the word I, just as we do. And if they use it with all the same kinds of subtlety and finesse that we do, I think it's going to be hard to deny to them that they have an I, to deny that they have a soul, if we have souls. To me, the word soul is really just synonymous with consciousness. It's not any different from it. I don't think you've changed the question. You say, okay, consciousness, we can imagine a machine having, but not soul. I would even go further, and I would say, once you admit the idea that a machine could perceive, could be a perceiving being, I think you've gone as far as you need to go in saying that it would have some degree of consciousness and the same degree of having a soul, if you want to use those terms. In other words, the critical part of all of this is the perception.